Chicken Little! What is it? What's going on?
The sky is falling! The sky is falling!
The sky is falling!
Are you crazy? No, it's true. Come with me.
No.
Well, that sounded pretty dramatic, without a doubt. We're going to talk a little bit about the sky is falling. Stick around. It's going to be a good podcast.
You are now tuned in to
An informed state of mind. The main takeaway is that this is not going to happen tonight. 2009, I made the decision to get out. My family, we got out. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to ISOM. Your host, Luke. Appreciate you joining us here today. So the question is the sky falling? Or does it just feel like it's falling in your world? And moreover, what concerns you, and what would you say is something that you have some control over in your world? And with that control, that means that you should be able to at least hedge against that. I mean, there's a lot of different things that are happening in the news, or media in general, right? I mean, we're being fed by just a ton of different platforms, and more than I could possibly even try to list in one episode, that's for sure. We know that Facebook has certainly been a power player in this for some time. And looking at the stats or the data by that, it looks like there's a decline in Facebook engagement. And that's probably a good thing. But of course, who's picking up the slack on that, right? TikTok, huge platform. We're looking at Twitter as being another huge platform. And I don't think there's been much decline with Twitter. As a matter of fact, there's probably been an uptick in that. And that's probably a good thing. Probably a little more reliable sources in there, but you're still going to have to do some vetting, without a doubt. And that certainly behooves anyone to do their homework before you jump on a bandwagon. Some would say, you know what, I've always followed this particular media outlet and I believe what's there. Some would say, of course, if you put that to a poll, it seems like, you know, there would be at least a good chunk of people that would say that, well, we'll use CNN, we'll beat up on CNN for a quick second. We can say that CNN is a great news source. Some would say, no, it's a commentary or it's an opinion piece, news outlet now, and it's not much in journalism. So with all these differing opinions, who's the idiot or who's right or who's wrong would be moreover. And again, it fills, even Twitter, for instance, and everybody going back and forth saying you're wrong. And this is why you're wrong. You know, so when we look at anything such as the recent, interview with Putin and Tucker, I mean, then the West has certainly done a real good job on trying to discredit that and to say we're not gonna, and a lot of the media is really not touching base on it, not to the fullest. They certainly didn't host it. So you're looking to alternative media sources to find the entire interview, for instance. So, I mean, if you look at what Putin said, for instance, at face value, for a person who's not necessarily educated on the history of what had transpired, and a lot of what he said was historical, which he seemed to recall quite well. But is it the truth? Some would say, well, of course, Russia's going to lie about this because the U.S. has never lied about anything and never would. Therefore, when they say, look, Russia's lying about this, it's propaganda. So should we believe the U.S. on this? And some would say, well, we can give you lots of different reasons or point out exact points within his speech that were absolutely a lie and back that up. And perhaps so. Is there another time when the U.S. has done the same thing? So who do we listen to? And this is part of it. So we understand that, I mean, whether or not the world is really getting worse or not, because, I mean, it seems to be that there's always something going on in the world that we need to be fearful of, or at least people have us believe that we should be fearful of it. Whether it's international, whether it's within a region that we live in, whether it's in our town, I would suggest it's certainly something that's going to touch you more in that sense of your regional or your local. Is something you need to put a little higher on your priority list. But the nature of the news will always make us think that it is getting worse, right? But does that actually affect your world? You know, the world in which you actually function in. You know, a devastating earthquake in Japan may affect us, but to what degree? This, while it's certainly a tragedy, we think, well, where does it where does this affect us? Now, geopolitically speaking, maybe it will affect us somewhere down the road. Maybe there's trade. Maybe it contaminates our sea waters. And certainly there's a fallout of some sort with that. And again, we may even have friends and family that are in those locations, of course, and that certainly can play a big part of that. And that's how it affects certain people. And certain people will say, it doesn't affect me at all, and it hasn't to this point that we know of. And that's it. And so we kind of leave it there. And I have no doubt that it affects you and your world to some degree, right? But where you prioritize that is really up to the individual. But we need to vet this intake, right? And we can do this by targeting our information sources more directly, right? So we can watch like, so for instance, when I was growing up, we watched the Agri Report, right, and talking about what soybeans were going to be costing money, because that really related to us. So that was why we tuned into the noon hour news. Every day, my dad, certainly my grandfather, would sit back and they would look at the price of, a bushel basket, a bushel of, soybean, for instance, and that was kind of the marker that was set. And we watched these prices all the time. And at the end of the day, when you're selling certainly, thousands or millions of bushels, depending on what kind of farm you have, that would made a direct difference. There was no doubt about that. And so, like I say, it's same as, but then the same instance, we'd see another story saying about a boy dying in a construction site that was closed and wasn't set away safely. It's a tragedy, but did we need to really see that? It wasn't in our local area. It was maybe even a different province away, but it certainly made the news. And so, but why do I need to pollute my mind with that sadness, for instance? And it goes back to why we look at accidents when we pass by, and what is it about the human race that we want to see the negative, right? And there's a lot of different theories to that. Some could suggest that basically seeing that lets us know that our life is not so bad, right? And that reassures us that we're on the right track, we're doing okay, and there's other people that have it worse off than we do. The other factor is it's a lesson. We look at that and we say, wow, there's a reminder not to be complacent. We need to keep our eyes open, see dangers, correct those dangers as we go. And that should. We hope that little boy didn't die in vain in that sense. And by allowing, the populace to see that, it's a reminder. Everybody, this is a reminder. And we're really putting it home by giving a little bit more detail than what maybe we would want, certain people to be exposed to. So I can see the benefit of that. I think that, again, when I come down to it and somebody asked me a question, so what did you think about Putin's speech? I think, I thought that it was fairly well put together. I said if the United States, or this was from a U.S. A buddy of mine, and I said, I don't think Biden could ever even have a speech even closely matching that to the caliber of what Putin had put out. And that's my personal opinion, and I think somebody could share that. Whether it was truth, not propaganda, I'm not here to decide which is what. But did the story seem compelling? Sure it did. But of course, the entire Iraqi war seemed very compelling, right? Somebody would say the 9/11 and why we went over was compelling. Certainly the weapons of mass destruction was very compelling. But come to the truth of it, well, the U.S. may have lied about that. So, or wasn't extremely clear about it. And can you think of any other examples where the U.S. has directly lied to the American people and or people abroad to push an agenda, to create a dialogue? So are we flawless in that sense? And this is important because it's really easy for us to jump on a particular bandwagon and say that Putin was wrong in everything he said, or Tucker was wrong by even going and interviewing him, or what Putin said, there was a different agenda, or why Tucker was there to begin with, there was an agenda to that. It wasn't for the American people. It was a selfish prop to, prop him up, and I'm sure he's going to do okay with that. I look at it like, well, somebody needs to communicate with this guy, right? And they're saying, well, one article I had read, they said that, Putin said, well, the West won't talk to me. It's like, well, that's not completely true. They won't talk to you, or Zelensky won't talk to you, but they'll talk to the Russians. Well, who is that? And what's more appropriate? So one could say, well, either way, it's not going to work. Well, Putin certainly had stated, we'll back off, or we'll figure out something here at least. But U.S. has got to stop propping this up, right? If you're going to keep giving weapons and keep shooting we're going to keep shooting back. It'd be the same thing, certainly in a law enforcement standpoint. If the person puts the gun down, that's it. We'll stop, right? We're going to stop defending ourselves. We're going to stop defending ourselves. And I think that's pretty probable. Now somebody would say, well, it's a lot more complex than that, Luke, and you just can't simplify it like that. And that may be. But we have to stay vigilant on making sure that we understand the greater picture and not fall into a propaganda one side or the other. And I think that's really important. So I mean, like, it's kind of like the idea of, ready, fire, aim. Now, wait a minute. I mean, something doesn't sound right about that. It rings wrong on the ear straight away. So how we understand and prioritize information can influence our state of mind, right? And how we feel about this information is going to guide us in our reactions, our plans, and how we act on those plans, right? To find a common conclusion that's good for us, right? Now, if that's collective, that's just fine. But if somebody's saying, well, ready, fire, aim is actually the correct way of saying it, but somebody says, no, it's ready, aim, fire, that makes sense. That's common sense approach to even stating that, because we would ready ourselves, we would aim, and we would fire, right? Moreover, but if somebody's saying that ready, fire, aim, that's the way to say it, right? That's correct. And the other person's actually just full of shit. That doesn't even make sense why they're saying it that way. It doesn't even ring right on the ear. Well, this is it. But see, case in point, I mean, plane crashes happen, and that always makes the news. But car crashes, which kill far more people, almost never do. And the key point here is that many people have a fear of flying, but almost no one has a fear of driving. And I can, that can certainly waver one way or the other. People are said to rank tornadoes, which kill about 50 Americans a year, as more common cause of death than asthma, which kills arguably about 4,000 Americans a year. Presumably because tornadoes make for better television. We allow our information sources to ready ourselves and fire from the hip without taking the time to actually aim and to ensure that we've acquired a target with some kind of accuracy, I guess is how I'd like to put that. So the idea is that we have to really vet that. We have to look at everything objectively while we're trying to inject our subjective viewpoint on that, or how we feel about it, or how we've interpreted some of that information. It's like the law, for instance, when we look at legislative law, it's not for us to interpret, that's for a judge to interpret, right? Politicians certainly will try to interpret this, but that's not for them to interpret. And we do that all the time, whether it's the U.S. Constitution and so on, but it always ends up in a courtroom for a judge or a panel of judges to decide what the actual interpretation of that is. And then at some particular point, we come to an end and we say, okay, I guess that's it, until it's challenged next time, if it's able to be challenged. We have the ability to challenge all the information that we intake, right? Whether it's just in our everyday lives, whether we're looking at, like I said, look into our fridge or our cupboards to, formulate a grocery list so we can go and act on that, of course, and get our groceries. It's subjective to what would it. If we asked everybody objectively in the house, some people might disagree and say, well, no, I don't think we actually need any more of that. And they would have their reasons. So again, I think that a lot of people, and I've been following along on TikTok. I've been following along on I don't watch TikTok all that often, I'm going to be honest with you. But, but X, for instance, we've watching some of the stories unfold there, and a lot of different viewpoints on, and there's a battle going on there. Nobody can see eye to eye. And why should we see eye to eye when you really think about it? Now, I'm going to have just a general talk here today, I suppose. It's not going to be, this segment anyway, this section. I can't tell you how to get your information. I can't tell you that, what's right or wrong. And I'm not going to try to do that because I'm not qualified. I'm just not. There's certain things that I can teach you and say, well, this is how I've come to understand it. And you could argue that point. And at the end of the day, I always come down to it and say, well, at the end of the day, we could go to a courtroom and have a judge decide that. And, well, that's the way it is. The highest level of the law in the land, so to speak, to find a mediator to solve that issue for us, right? And at some particular point, we have to accept something. So where do we accept it? Our governments have a lot of power of persuasion, power to control us, power to tell us what is right and wrong. There's been a saying before, the victors write history. So what if another person who is part of that battle or that war, for instance, who was not the victor or was seen as the victor has a different story on that? Does that automatically make them wrong? people are going to hold on to a story, especially if it's worked for them. They're not going to let up on that. Most people will hang on to a lie, for instance, until they absolutely have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that this is a lie, this is not fiction. And sometimes they'll come forward and say, yeah, okay, it's a lie, right? So I look at it, the idea is, well, is the sky falling? Well, in my particular world, I could say, if well, again, the sky is falling. Well, if I look at it from the standpoint that one of my kids has gotten sick, maybe I lost my job, and interest rates are so high, that's putting more of a crunch onto it, and the vehicle breaks down, a hefty transmission repair, for instance, I'm going to definitely feel within my immediate world, right, which belongs to me and my family, the sky is falling, without a doubt. When we look at the grand scheme of things and talk about world events and what have you, you could say, man, the sky is falling. There's just so much going on. It is insane. And we've got certainly YouTube channels out there or other channels or other sources of media that want us to follow their lead, and some do, where they can be just basically what they call fear porn, all right? Fear mongering. We know that sells. Again, the media does it all the time. And people, again, are armed with cell phones and look for that viral video, which we all feed into, regardless of the complete story, and we'll settle for the 2-minute or less video clip, or even just headlines. And they get the information, they go, oh, wow, that's crazy. Meanwhile, they needed to read more of it and actually do some fact-checking with that. And we have lots of people out there who want to do fact-checking, a lot of different agencies and what have you. Facebook was on that bandwagon for some time, especially when COVID was around. And here's something, I'll go back to this. So I had a call from the health unit today talking about my 17-year-old kid, saying that they felt that they weren't up to date. They said, well, they're not up to date on their vaccinations. And so I looked and I said, well, what are they missing? I mean, the other question I had is, are these vaccinations mandatory? And they said, and this is the curious part, they said, no, none of them are actually mandatory. I said, well, besides COVID vaccination. Oh, well, yeah, that was mandatory. But meanwhile, that's at a provincial level. But the federal level basically stated, no, it wasn't mandatory. They changed their story, right? Now, somebody would say, well, did our prime minister ever say that it was mandatory? Well, he certainly alluded to that, without a doubt. So what is it then, right? There was a couple of different things in this that they actually got wrong as well, which I had to correct them on. And at some particular point, they said, well, we'd like to include parents in on this. And I said, but that's funny, because when my kid last year kind of got attacked in class and my kid kind of fought back and what have you, that whole thing unrolled in school, and I didn't know anything about it until my kid came home and basically within 2 days told me, said, yeah, well, I got into a bit of an altercation, but this is what happened, Dad. I was just defending myself, and that's it. So what happened? So, well, I got removed from the class, and actually, because it was the beginning of the year, they actually put me in a different class. I said, well, you got punished then for defending yourself. And they said, well, yeah. I said, why didn't I hear anything about this? And so I called the school, and I asked the school, I said, why didn't I hear anything about this? And they said, well, sir, that really the school level, it's in legislation. We do not have to talk to you about that. We don't have to tell you about that. I said, that's impossible. That makes no sense. But yet you want me to explain why my child is or isn't at school. You seem to think that you need to inform me when they're not at school. But I can't reinforce a problem that became physical at school and reinforce something if in fact, which it seemed to be that they felt that she was one at fault. Maybe they had the whole story, maybe they didn't really matter. But the point is that they effectively removed her from the class. Now, we already know if there's a victim, certainly in any kind of an assault of any sort in everyday life, we usually remove the person who's bad, right? We don't punish the individual who's actually done something right. Now, neither here nor there, the fact of the matter is that they didn't inform. But now the person has informed. But yet, at the same instance, in our province, for instance, there doesn't have to be any information given by the time they're 16. They don't have to tell me that if a child wants to change their name, for instance, right? Or change how they identify or their gender. That's a big secret. If the child doesn't want to say it, which would be on the parent, certainly in the relationship with the child, and so we can put that back on them. But the fact of the matter is the school doesn't need any permissions needed or anything of that nature. They don't need to consult with the parents on that whatsoever. But when it comes down to vaccinations, for some reason, they got to include us on that. And I find that very interesting. Alberta, certainly Danielle Smith, the PM there, or not PM, certainly the premier out there, made some monumental changes within the transgender, area. And if you're interested in that, you certainly can check it out. If you're Canadian, you probably already know about it. Was it the right move? Was it not the right move? Well, there's lots of debate on that right now, right? And I'm not going to say whether it was right or wrong. I have my opinion. There's no doubt. Don't need to share it here. And I'm not looking to influence anybody else or tell them that they're wrong on the way they think about it. What I can say is that at some particular point, we've got to get on the same page. You can't vote until you're 18, but you can decide what to do with your body at 16, maybe with some parental consent, and maybe some locations you don't need any of that. You can't buy alcohol or cigarettes, for instance, until you're 19, because that's doing permanent harm to your body potentially. So we want to make sure that they're a little more informed before allowing that to take place. Where we go. I'm 16 to drive a car, 2,000-pound rocket going down the road with the capabilities of doing 200 kilometers an hour, you know what I mean? Or, 150 miles an hour, whatever the case is. That seems to be okay. See, so we are not, and somebody can say, but there's a lot to all of that. And I would agree. Yes, there definitely is a lot to that. But at some point, we have to get on the same page with something. We have to be able to, where can we find a source that this is it? This is the source I can reliably go to every time to get, if I want information on what's happening in the Middle East, if I want information on what's happening in the Ukraine, Russian conflict, and everybody else that might be poking their nose into that particular conflict, and who's funding it, how much we're funding it, what we're funding, where's that money going for, where's the receipt, how much of it was used. Maybe that's none of our business. It should be. And can we find that place? That someone say, yeah, we can find that. Okay. Let us know that. But where's that? Why can't we go to that one source? And someone would say, well, we don't want necessarily one source, and I would agree with that. Right? It's dangerous. But in the same instance, that creates such divide, right? Such a divide. News agencies, and again, we talked about ad fonts as one of the locations you can get to get a rating on somebody for the reliability, and it looks on a pretty much on different axes, two different axes anyways, one for reliability, one for, well, more than that, I suppose, one for reliability, whether they're sitting left or right leaning on the particular matter. And we certainly understand what that means. And then it goes on and on, certainly. I mean, there's different categories for everything and how you want to break something down. But then again, you could say to that individual, you're wrong on that, and they could try to defend that, and they could bring information forward to defend just that. But where are we going to get that information? Because right now we're getting it from so many different sources. How are we ever going to see eye to eye anything? And then again, going back to immigration, you have, let's just say, I don't even know, but let's just say that there was 10 different cultures that you brought into Canada or the US, and everybody's looking at it differently. We've already seen examples of this, right? I've seen examples of this. The short videos that are put up by the media saying, hey, I'm a certain culture, and we come here, and yeah, we're glad you let us into the country, and we're glad to be this citizen, but we still have our full ties to this other country. It's just not safe to live there. And our religion that's based back there, we're fully committed to that religion. So maybe they should change the laws here so that it accommodates us more. And when someone would say, but that's terrible, that's never going to happen, and no, that's not what this country was built on. But I kind of come back to it and I said, but aren't our country supposed to evolve to some degree? While it's certainly locked in constitutions or charters and so on, could they make an amendment to those? Yeah, they could. Slippery slope, some would say. Critical thinking certainly is part of all of this on how we're going to go ahead with this. So let me talk about what I'm going to suggest is at least 5 different critical thinking skill sets. So critical thinking is an intelligent and intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying or analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. Intellectually disciplined process. All right, now there's a key word there for me. Okay, it's a disciplined process. Now, you can be disciplined certainly in the sense that I'm going to continually go to CNN. I'm going to continually go to CBC these are the places I'm going to continually go because I feel like they're giving me the right answers and they're reputable. All right. It's not saying you're lazy because you're only going to one news source. It's not to say that, hey, they are right or they are wrong. I'm not exploring that. So let's look over a couple different, 5 different ones here that I've got listed here that I kind of wanted to go over, right? So coming back to critical thinking is important. This is going to touch base on everything that we do to figure out whether or not we're on the right track. So number 1 I'm going to put down is observation, right? And of course, this is the ability to take information in and make sense of it, plainly said. A critical observation is what they say would be the ability to notice subtle details that allow us to maneuver situations more tactfully. And certainly we do this in policing, right? And that's what I certainly, I think about when I was writing that. It's different from critical thinking, though, in the sense that, which involves analyzing facts and information to reach a decision or a conclusion. So if we look at the analysis portion of it, right, which would be my second point here, this is the ability to take information and break it down into smaller pieces, which is important. Otherwise, it's going to become very, very overwhelming, right? So if we can take it, and again, slowing things down, right, under the observation, and then what we've observed, we want to have an analysis of that information or analyze it. This is part of critical thinking, that is the ability to carefully examine something. Okay, whether it's a problem, a set of data, or text information that we've received. So, I mean, and people with this analytical skill set, can examine information, understand what it means, and then properly explain it to others, with the implications of that information, right? So, again, like asking thoughtful questions, which we hope we're seeing, when an interview, for instance, why is a particular person who's interviewing another person ask those questions? Are they in some kind of chronological order? At the end of it, it'll tell a decent story. At the end, and we think, okay, we've asked all the right questions and we've got a pretty good description of what we were trying to accomplish there. Here it is. This is the complete story now. Right? If we've done our job right, and if the person being interviewed has explained it to some degree of accuracy. Right? Or at least we can come to conclude that this was some kind of accuracy to what they were saying, and it was truthful, right? But again, we'd have to break that down as well. Inference, would be maybe a category, and then this is the ability to draw a conclusion based on that evidence. This is what we talk about. So we've looked at it, and we've had times to analyze this information. So we need to be able to draw a conclusion, and based on the evidence that we've gone to explore, right? So when you make an inference, for instance, you connect the dots from the known to the unknown, from the stated to, say, the unstated. Sounds like a Rumfeld speech. An inference, is a logical conclusion based on analysis of objects, sensations, events, facts, and ideas that seems likely or truthful in the light of what is known. The fourth one I think I want to talk about is communication. Like, communication influences the process of critical thinking, and that is effective during a conversation or any kind of discussion, really. The major link between communication and critical thinking is the possibility to understand how to observe and identify the thought process and the line of reasoning for an individual, right? The other one I want to speak about is problem solving in general. I think this is a really important one. I mean, because critical thinking and problem solving involve, locating and processing and analyzing, and then again, interpreting the relevant and what we hope is reliable information to address complex issues or problems, to make informed judgments or decisions, and then again, as we talked about before, be able to take the effective and or evasive action, right, or productive action to draw a conclusion. And I think that that's certainly important, and that's why we come back to the idea of saying, and more simply, coming to that realization, right, and then, looking at it to say, well, we need to that's that realization or that observation, right? And looking at it, we need to analyze that information. We need to assess that information. And at that point, we're going to create a plan. And sometimes we're creating plans where we're communicating, right? We're problem solving in that sense. And we need to be able to come to a conclusion, right? And then we'll act on that. And so that's kind of important. And what I mean by acting on that is just saying, hey, you know what, we're gonna pull the plug on this mortgage early, and because you know what we're seeing in the information that down the road here looks like we're gonna have an higher interest rate. Let's lock into another 5 years at least at this rate, because we know that it's most likely not going to come down below that. If it does come down below by a few points, it's still a win, or at least that's how I would look at it. So I think that, you know, when we're looking at, say, for instance, any kind of interview, whether it was the Putin interview with Tucker, whether it's the response from the U.S. on that, even the precursor to that interview, what was the U.S. saying, right? There's something to be said for that. We need to look at that. Why do they not want any dialogue with that president, right? Is it more on principle alone? Is it because they already know he's a liar and it's just all propaganda? Is that true though? Is that true? It's like someone saying to me, it's like, you know, well, you don't vote, so you don't have a right to, you know, to have any say in what happens afterwards because you didn't exercise your right to vote. And you know, or your duty to vote, some people would say. And I say, well, hang on a second. You know, why am I excluded because of that? That doesn't make any sense. I didn't vote, sure, but maybe I didn't find there was a reason to vote. They didn't give me anything to vote for. So yeah, my point is that you still got two idiots running, and I don't want to vote for either one of them. Matter of fact, the system itself, I seem to think is a bit flawed, and I don't want to vote in that system. Give me a game worth playing, and I'll play the game. Right? Make the rules right, so there's accountability at that, and there's a good referee that actually can do something with it. Because right now, the way I look at it in the U.S. and even in the Canadian side, I think it's a joke to some degree. That's my personal opinion. And again, I think I'm entitled to that opinion. Somebody can say, look, you're wrong. Okay. I can either look at them and say, I don't care. I just close the door, block them, and that's the end of the discussion, which I guess is what we were trying to do with Russia, right? Or at least Putin. Or we can say, okay, well, let's open up a dialogue and see why. We got to come to some kind of conclusion here, right? So, well, that's just it. So thinking about if your sky is falling, well, then what are you going to do about that? If you really feel that that's the case, you know, is it in fact falling for you? To what degree? What's the priority level on that? How are you going to actually look at the problem with using critical thinking? Looking at even those 5 different steps, those are basic steps. There's a lot more to it in each individual category, no doubt about it. That's why I've simplified it in the way I kind of look at it, and the way I've kind of taught this, I guess, in some of the platforms. And what we look at it that way, and certainly in the use of force, and not even use of force, but a good investigative work. I mean, we sit there and we assess the information, we create a plan, and then we act upon the plan. And that's always, infinitely, forever and ever. We're always doing that cycle, always, on everything. At some particular point, you're going to implement a plan, but sometimes plans are very final. Right? You made a decision, that's it. You made the decision. It's like a tree in the backyard, and you go, gosh, should I cut the tree? Should I not cut the tree? Looks as though it's kind of getting weak. I got a professional in. They looked at it and said, yeah, it's kind of weak. At just the right wind, it looks like it could fall on the house. So do we cut the tree? Trees take a long time to grow. This one here we think is probably between 30 and 50 years old, give or take. And we know that majority of the wilderness around us, we know that all the trees are approximately 50 to 55 years of age from what we can see from the trees we're cutting down. So it seems to be consistent through the entire forest for the oldest trees standing, which means that all of this was wiped out approximately 50 to 50 years ago by most likely forest fire. Right? There was no logging evidence in this particular area for those particular tree species, and it definitely wasn't replanted. This was actually a naturally grown forest. So we could surmise that it was probably a forest fire. So we know that it's going to take probably that much longer to grow. In that particular area, maybe we'll get another 50 years before maybe we're just around the corner from another forest fire. Nothing, who's to say, right? But there's a lot of decisions making there. At some point, you pull the plug, you cut the tree down. Well, that's it. It's down, right? You can't really go back on that. What's done is done. So, you know, you can say, okay, well, what's next? Well, let's assess that, create a plan, and then act on it. Anyway, so food for thought there. I just wanted to touch base on a little bit of that. Hopefully I've explained that all well. I want to just have a little chat about that. And I don't really know, I'm trying to wrap my head around what was kind of taking place. And again, at the end of the day, does it really matter to me? Not on the first glance. I don't think what's happening over certainly in Ukraine and that matters to me so much, although we're sending a lot of money there. And I would like to see the receipt on that. Me personally, I'd like to see the receipt on that. Where is that money going? Can we guarantee that money is going for a certain thing? It's kind of like when you're donating to a particular charity or something to that nature, you kind of like to see exactly where that money goes to. How much does the CAO make out of that? How much is lost actually in just wages or something of that nature, bonuses? It burns my ass, but there it is. So I won't name any particular ones, but there's a few out there that I can think of, right? So, but that's it. Critical thinking, it's important. We use it every day, and we should be using it more often and more defined, and probably be better at it, right? Not be so lazy and take that. But again, you got to prioritize it. What's important to you? Anyways, let us know what you think about that. And if you got anything to add, reach us on the different platforms that we've got listed down the show notes. And until next time, take care, folks.
Echo, did you like the show?
This has been a Rush Creek production. Echo, did you like the show? Good boy.